20th century witnessed a very particular form of modernity in society, economy, and politics. Latin America was well situated to become an important participant in that era's boom in global trade. The industrial economies in the north needed a variety of inputs: copper, nitrates, silver, oil, iron, rubber, coffee, sugar, tobacco, and other raw resources that could be found in abundance in Latin America. In exchange, the North offered railroads and other manufactured goods. The boom increased the quality of life, healthcare, and the use of natural resources. Artists traveled to Europe and brought new ideas to Latin America. Mexico's film industry grew exponentially and was keeping pace with Hollywood. The boom was not only economic but cultural as well. Unlike the liberal democracies of that era, most Latin American elites believed that their societies would never prosper, would never become modern, if order was not at first established. They believed that democracy is a messy process everywhere that brings nothing but chaos. They believed that the Latin American people were not civilized enough to exercise their democratic rights responsibly. Orders were imposed from above, as the masses were not expected to understand their own interests.
Women's roles in society drastically changed during the era of modernization. Due to the export boom, control of family businesses was passed to men. Thus, women were no longer needed in their usual roles, and they found employment elsewhere, for example, working as cooks, maids, or seamstresses. Unlike other areas of the world, factory owners enabled women to join the industrial workforce, while employers ensured the safety and virtue of their female employees, asking for their loyalty in return, for instance, so they wouldn't join unions. This assurance came at the cost of social interactions, since it was often achieved through segregation. Despite the ability of women to work, they still did not have equal rights and freedoms as men. For instance, they were paid less. As a result, women began fighting for equal rights, bringing about an early form of feminism. Unfortunately, since feminism was such a new ideology, it did not get far at the time.
The production of coffee has a long history in Brazil, from when the first shrub was planted in 1772 to its peak when it produced 80% of the world's supply of coffee, to today, when it remains a valuable export economy for the nation. For a specified viewpoint of the Week 7 theme, I'll focus on the Brazilian coffee trade during the age of modernization. While originally the industry benefited from the same transport routes as the sugar and mining industries had created, the coffee front, as in the ever-expanding coffee plantations, eventually expanded enough to necessitate a modern rail system, which would connect the inland to the ports. In 1860, Brazil had 200-some kilometers of rail. Just 25 years later, the country was crisscrossed with nearly 7,000-kilometer rail system. The industry growth both called for and funded the progress of the country into modern infrastructure. However, this modernization was incongruent with the social ideals of modernity. While you think about that, I'm going to go get a drink.
A few moments later.
The initial growth of the coffee industry was thanks to slave labor. From 1800 to 1850, more than 1 million slaves were imported to work on the coffee plantations. As slave labor became decreasingly available, as emancipation swept across Latin America, there was a slow shift to paid immigrant labor. The process of slave emancipation was uneven and lengthy. The elite of the coffee industry were very powerful in Brazilian politics. It was in part because of their economic concerns and influence that Brazil was the last country in Latin America to abolish slavery in 1888. Labor conditions were extremely poor. Plantation workers may not have been property anymore, but they were not making anywhere near enough to be truly free from their plantation. Therefore, the modernization of the economy into a globally functioning, flourishing export economy did not always mean that the egalitarian ideals of the free modern subject, imbued with inalienable human rights, were upheld.
Porfirio Diaz is sometimes remembered as a cruel and villainous dictator. However, he moved Mexico closer to the age of modernity. Diaz's modernizing Mexico is clearly shown in the improvement of the railway and mining industries. More specifically, Mexico's railway grew exponentially from only 580 miles to more than 19,000 miles. Railways were essential to modern nations at the time to allow more efficient transport for military and economic products. Diaz was also able to attract foreign investors to fund many modernizing, industrialization, and infrastructure projects. One of these foreign investors happened to be the United States, where it offered Diaz and Mexico an unlimited market for their products. By 1900, $63 million in trade passed between the two nations.
Although Diaz brought power and capital to Mexico, many people suffered under his control. The acts that brought foreign money into Mexico also gave ownership of these properties to international investors. This meant that the poor lower-class Mexicans had no chance at owning land, widening the chasm between the rich and the poor. Though Diaz clearly modernized the country, it came at a huge cost to the impoverished and destitute. In summary, a wave of modernity took hold of Latin America during the end of the 19th century. This was shown through the changing export-based economies, the evolving role of women, and the role of politicians such as Porfirio Diaz. Thank you for watching our video.